What secret do you have that could destroy your family? Recently, my brother and I were helping my parents renovate the garage. I was clearing out some old boxes and stumbled upon a metal box under some tools. Inside were letters and a few old photographs. I opened one letter and realized it was addressed to my father from some woman. It contained phrases like, "It's a shame we can't be together," and "I'm glad I can see you at least once a month." At first, I thought it was an old story from before they got married. But in the photographs, he looked almost the same as he does now. The letters were dated just a few years ago. I don't know if it's still going on or if it's over. But now, every time I see my parents together, I'm seething inside. My mother adores him, always protecting and supporting him. I'm afraid that if I tell him, I'll destroy the family. But if I keep quiet, I'll carry this secret with me. I feel like a traitor, even though I've done nothing. I just know too much now. I stood in the middle of the garage, holding the letters in my hands, and something inside me broke. The world I'd lived in for over 20 years suddenly cracked. Everything that had once seemed familiar and reliable, morning breakfasts, family trips, Sunday dinners, now felt like fragile scenery, hiding another, darker story. I looked at the photographs, my father, almost as I'd seen him yesterday at the dinner table, next to a woman I didn't even know. His smile was too soft, too intimate, a smile he should have shared only with my mother. From that day on, I didn't feel like I belonged in my family the way I used to. I felt like I was carrying a ticking time bomb inside me. I smiled at dinner, nodded when my father told another joke, listened to my mother when she shared her vacation plans, but only one question rang in my head. Did she know? I caught myself studying her face. Sometimes I thought I saw a shadow of suspicion deep in her eyes. What if she'd known all along? Maybe she'd kept quiet because she was afraid of being alone, or because it was easier than tearing down the house they'd spent decades building. But then she'd laugh, straighten my father's collar, carefully place an extra piece of pie on his plate, and I'd understand. No, she believed him. She still looked at him as if he were the center of her world. I began to notice things I hadn't seen before. Phone calls that my father would answer in the yard. His delays after work, which he explained away as traffic jams or urgent matters. The subtle scent of someone else's perfume, which might or might not have been my imagination. But that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was that I could no longer trust. I lived as if in a house where the walls were held together by paint, and it only took one blow for everything to crumble. I imagined this conversation many times, walking into my father's office, placing letters and photographs in front of him, looking him in the eyes and asking, why? Sometimes I saw him broken, confessing everything and begging for silence. Sometimes I saw him angry, accusing me of sticking my nose where it didn't belong. But every time in this imaginary conversation, I felt only one thing. After this, nothing would ever be the same. I tried to talk to my brother, but I couldn't bring myself to do so. He'd always been closer to our father than I was. They could spend hours tinkering in the garage, discussing cars, watching football. For him, our father was a hero. If I told him, I'd be stealing not only his father, but also the illusion that was his foundation. I had no right. And yet, every time my brother laughed at our father's joke, I wanted to scream, "You don't know what he did." I tossed and turned at night. I read those letters over and over again, as if searching for answers. But there were only fragments of emotion, passion, regret, secret meetings, words about how one day everything will change. And I wondered, has it changed? Or is it still going on right now, while mom is cooking dinner and waiting for him to come home? The longer I remained silent, the more complicit I felt. It seemed I was innocent, yet at the same time, I was the keeper of a secret that could destroy everything. I felt anger at my father, pity for my mother, guilt towards my brother, and emptiness inside. I started avoiding my father. I couldn't joke with him anymore, couldn't hold a conversation. He noticed and asked what was wrong, but I brushed it off. I wasn't ready for a conversation. Sometimes I thought the easiest thing would be to destroy these letters and photographs, burn them, turn them to ashes, and convince myself they were just a figment of my imagination. But I couldn't. They became evidence that burned my hands. I hid the box under my bed, and every time I passed by, I felt as if it were breathing in the darkness, a reminder of its presence. And now I live like this. I smile during the day, I think in the evening, I can't sleep at night. I see how my mother, without suspecting anything, believes in a man I can no longer name without doubt. And I think, what will happen if the truth comes out? What if one day he leaves? Or what if she finds out from someone else? I don't know what's right, to remain silent to preserve her happiness, or to tell the truth and destroy her world. But I do know one thing. From the day I opened that metal box, I will never be the same. I continued to live with the box under my bed as a heavy, cold witness to someone else's betrayal. Every time my father hugged my mother, feeling her hand in his, a lump would form in my throat. Sometimes it seemed to me that for a second my mother's gaze lingered on his face in a slightly different way, warmer, more trusting, and I wanted to tear that scene from myself, to prove to myself that the truth was still out there and would sooner or later break through the veil. But behind my father's apparent calm lurked a series of small tricks. Unexpected errands, work meetings, slightly suspicious messages on his phone that he carefully hid when my mother appeared in the room. He didn't look guilty. He looked tired. That made everything even more difficult. I lived for several weeks in this tension until I realized passive waiting wasn't enough. Silence wouldn't save anyone. It would only allow the betrayal to continue. I decided to proceed carefully and cunningly, not snatch the box at a kitchen get-together, not make a scene in front of guests, and not tear the family apart right away. I started keeping a journal. I recorded dates, times, and small details. When my father went outside, what he said, the scents in his shirt, the names that flashed in text messages, this helped me keep a cool head and gave me the sense of control so necessary when the world was crumbling beneath me. After a couple of weeks, I noticed a pattern. Almost all the letters were sent during periods when my father was traveling to a neighboring city on business, urgent negotiations, meeting with a contractor, need to get some miles on the clock. I began waiting for the moment when he'd leave for another business trip, not out of revenge, but rather out of a desire to understand. Was this a one-time weakness, a forgotten romance from the past, or an ongoing affair? I was afraid to ask directly. How do you ask a man who is both your father and your traitor? One Saturday, my father went to his project, and I seized the opportunity. I knew he kept a small briefcase with documents on the top shelf of his office. I'd seen it there hundreds of times. I took his car keys, he rarely locks the drawer, walked into the office, closed the door, sat down, and caught my heart pounding in my chest. I thought, if I don't find anything, I'll go crazy with suspicion. If I do, I'll mentally destroy the man I once loved. I opened the briefcase. Inside, besides the bills and old warranty cards, was an envelope. Inside were several more photographs and new letters, carefully signed with a woman's name, the very one that had appeared in the box. In one photo, my father holds the woman's hand by a fountain in an unfamiliar park. In another, they are hugging in a cafe. The dates were from last year, early summer, and a couple more entries from just the last few months. On one page was a short confession. I feel so bad without you on weekdays. I'm afraid we'll soon ruin everything, but I can't stop thinking about our meetings. My hand shook, and I almost dropped the photographs. I reread the lines again and again, trying to grasp the context, but it was simple. This wasn't a random connection to the past. This was the present, a brief, vivid, and repetitive present. I put everything back, closed my briefcase, returned the keys, and ran through the scenario in my head. How to tell my mother, how to protect myself and my brother, how to avoid destroying the entire family foundation if there was a chance for improvement. I knew that a frank conversation in the family, where the spark of infidelity would turn into a conflagration, would leave no one's life the same. But continuing to live a lie was also unacceptable. I chose a middle ground, talking to my father first. It seemed logical to give the man a chance to explain himself. I went to his garage where he was fixing an old motorcycle and tried to sound as calm as possible. "Dad, I need to talk to you," I said. He put down his wrench, licked his lips, and his eyes widened with surprise. Not alarm, no. Definite surprise, as if I'd said something completely unexpected. I placed the photograph on the table. Silence. He stared, then picked it up, and something human flickered across his face. Guilt, fear, an attempt to gather words. "It's not what you think," he began. I interrupted. "Tell me what it means. Tell me it's over. Tell me." He laughed hollowly, not from amusement, but rather from the realization of how messed up the situation was. "I'm not proud of it," he said finally, "but I can't say it's over either. It's complicated. We're both alone. She listens to me when you can't, when I can't tell Mom." His words cut deeper than any bitterness. The most hurtful truth wasn't that he'd had an affair, but that he'd treated it as a cure for his own awkwardness and loneliness, without considering the consequences for those around him. I felt a surge of rage, not only at him, but at myself. Why had I turned a blind eye for so long? The conversation led nowhere. My dad looked like a frightened child who'd made a mistake but wasn't ready to take responsibility. He asked me not to tell Mom, promised to think about it. I couldn't believe his request. Asking for silence is asking me to allow the lie to continue. I left without saying anything to anyone. The night passed in thought. I could save the family now, shut my mouth and put the photos back in the box, or I could take a risk and tell my mother the truth, give her a choice and the right to act. I understood that every choice has its price. The next day I met with my brother. He noticed I was out of sorts. We went to the bar where we'd had lemonade as kids, and I chose my moment. "I found something in the garage," I said quietly. His face immediately turned white. "What?" he asked. I told him everything, but didn't show him the letters. His reaction was different. It wasn't rage that awakened within him, but confusion. He'd loved his father selflessly, and the thought of him betraying the family crashed down on him. "We have to talk to Mom," he said decisively. "No," I blurted out. "We first need to figure out what this is and how long it's going to last. If this is a passing weakness, if it's a mistake, we might keep it. But if he continues, it's more than just a mistake." We couldn't reach an agreement. He wanted to protect my father. I wanted to protect my mother. A quiet civil war broke out in the house. Every evening I saw my parents together, as usual. Sons, dinner, TV. But in my head, everything sounded different. What if Mom finds out not from me, but from someone else? I tried to imagine what it would look like. A phone call, tears, accusations, objects falling, and emptiness in each of their eyes. A few more weeks passed. My father became more distant, my mother tense, and I became unbearably irritable. I began demanding proof of myself. I recorded his absences, checked his phone bills, carefully so as not to get caught, opened mail envelopes, checked cars. It was almost criminal. Sometimes I thought the line between truth and intrusion was so fine that one day I would cross the line and lose the right to complain about the consequences. One night, a number I didn't recognize called me. On the other end, a woman's voice was quiet and worried. "Hello, I think your father's name's Son. My name is Lena." My heart stopped. "Why are you calling?" I asked, as if I could replay every moment. She said she'd found my name in letters my father had forgotten, that she didn't want to hurt me, but she didn't know what to do. She pleaded, "Tell him to stop. This is destroying me." That phrase was the last straw. She didn't want to destroy my family, but she was asking me to stop. She might have left on her own if my father had said no, but he didn't. He kept going. I hung up and stared at the phone like it was a small, black cord. In that same second, I realized that silence was impossible. I had to give my mother the right to choose. I couldn't be complicit in her fate. The next morning, I placed the box of letters on the table and called my mother. She came over and smiled, that same familiar, welcoming smile. But it vanished, barely noticeable, when she saw the contents. "What is this?" she whispered. I didn't hesitate. I told her everything as best I could, without dramatizing or reproaching. I gradually laid out the dates, photographs, and texts. Confusion flashed in her eyes, then fear. Then it was as if someone had turned off the lights and the room had become empty. She sat up. "Are you sure?" she asked. I answered truthfully. She closed her eyes, ran her hand over her face, and I saw tears welling up under her eyes. She didn't scream or throw her glass on the floor. She remained silent and only said, "Give me time." I hugged her, and in that moment, the man I hated and the woman I adored became as fragile as glass. Mom didn't burst into tears or make a scene. She retreated into silence, and that was even worse. She demanded that Dad stay home that weekend. Dad tried to explain, but when Mom spoke, calmly and without shouting, he fell silent. She demanded honesty and time to process. She confronted him not in anger, but with cold clarity. "If you're not finished, you have to leave. If you are finished, you have to tell me yourself and finish this once and for all. We need to decide what happens next." This logic exploded the family, but it also provided a path to resolution. I realized that the truth, no matter how cruel, is better than a comfortable lie. My actions weren't heroic. I opened the box. I gathered the strength to tell. I gave my mother a choice. She asked for time, and I respected her choice. What followed were months of therapy, conversations, and painful confessions. My father admitted he was lonely, that he'd been seeking emotional support without considering the consequences. He asked for forgiveness, but he understood that forgiveness wasn't something one could demand. My mother said she would think and make a decision slowly. My brother sided with my father first, then with her. The family fractured, mended, and fractured again. Sometimes I wanted to run far away from that house and never return. Sometimes I understood. No matter what happened, we would now live more honestly, even if it was painful. I'm not telling this to seem right or uncompromising. I'm telling it because the secret that could have destroyed my family almost destroyed me before it even reached them. We learned to talk. We went to couples therapy, family therapy. My mother said she was afraid of being alone, but even more afraid of living with someone she couldn't trust. My father tried to make amends, but the mistakes, like footprints in the sand, remain. Almost a year had passed. We weren't the same, and that was the sad truth. One November evening, as I was trying to fall asleep, I heard laughter coming from the kitchen. My parents were sitting together, drinking tea and talking quietly. I wasn't sure it was happiness. Rather, it was something pale and new, a cautious attempt to move on, not based on deception, but on the truth, no matter how bitter. I placed my hand on the box under my bed, and for the first time in a long time, felt a less intense pressure on my chest. If you're holding a secret that could destroy your family, I can't tell you what to do. I only know that the truth is a heavy burden, but so is silence. Sometimes you have the strength to say everything and let people choose. Sometimes the strength is to remain silent and protect. In my story, the strength was giving my mother a choice and not leaving her fate to chance. This isn't ideal. It's simply my journey through pain to honesty. And yes, I'll never be the same again, but maybe that's for the best. After all, living in a house where the walls hide the truth is living someone else's life. Let our life now be different, more fragile, but honest. After that conversation with Mom and Dad, life at home changed forever. Even the air felt different, heavier, as if saturated with a tension that couldn't be dispelled. Dinner was no longer a cozy time when we discussed work, school, or weekend plans. It was now a spectacle of silence, where everyone was afraid to say an unnecessary word. Mom looked at Dad intently, as if searching his face for signs of deception, and he, head down, ate mechanically, as if it were a duty and not a family dinner. I watched them and felt something new growing inside me, a mixture of guilt and pride. Guilt for being the one who opened Pandora's box, and pride for not allowing this lie to continue. Sometimes I wished I could turn back time and leave the box closed, but then I remembered my mother's look, her tears, and her fragile smile after I told the truth, and I realized silence would have been worse. My brother kept his distance. He said he didn't want to get involved, but I could see he was seething inside. His seemingly unshakable faith in my father had crumbled. He no longer spent time with him in the garage like he used to. didn't discuss sports, or ask him for advice on small matters. A wall had grown between them, hard to miss. Sometimes he'd come into my room and quietly ask, "What if we ruined everything for nothing? What if Mom would have forgiven us if she hadn't found out?" I'd answer that it wasn't us who destroyed the family, but my father. But I wasn't sure myself. Despite all the pain, Mom behaved with dignity. She started seeing a psychologist and invited Dad to go with her. At first, he resisted, saying, "It's pointless, that we just need to forget and move on." But eventually he agreed. I realized he was afraid of losing her, not because he loved her as much as he once did, but because he had grown accustomed to her presence, to her care, to her role in his life. He was afraid of losing his familiar comfort, not the woman he had betrayed. There were good moments too, strange, bright glimmers amid the darkness. For example, one evening, my mother read aloud a page from his old diary, which I had found in that box. In it, he wrote about holding me in his arms in the hospital when I was born, and how afraid he was of losing me. My mother cried, but she smiled. But she said, "I want to believe that this person is still out there somewhere." In that moment, I realized she wasn't ready to finally put an end to it. Over time, I too learned to live with this knowledge. It didn't disappear, but became a part of me. Like a scar that no longer hurts but always reminds me of what happened. I began to better understand what truth means in a family. It doesn't always mean loud revelations and scandals. Sometimes truth is simply the ability to look each other in the eye without the fear of shadows whispering behind our backs. Almost a year has passed. Mom and Dad haven't divorced, though I know that was considered. They continue to live together, but now their relationship is like the careful renovation of an old house. They boarded up some cracks, touched up some walls, but the foundation is still cracked. My brother has become distant. He went to study in another city and rarely comes back. I, however, have stayed by Mom's side to be her support. Sometimes I wonder, did I do the right thing? Perhaps my truth destroyed more than it saved. But then I see my mother, though tired, though not as carefree as before, she is honest with herself. She no longer lives in an illusion. And I understand that this is better than a deception that would have come to light sooner or later anyway. Now I know secrets don't disappear. They will always find a way to spill out, even if you try your best to hide them. And when that happens, you must be prepared for your life to never be the same again. But perhaps that's where the chance to build something new lies. Perhaps on the ruins, but without the lies. After everything came to light, my relationship with my father became a minefield. We rarely spoke, and every conversation was filled with pauses, forced smiles, and attempts to avoid the topic hanging in the air like a storm cloud. But the hardest part was that I could no longer look at him the same way. I always considered him a role model, a person worth emulating. He was silent but reliable. His words were rarely loud, but always carried weight. When I was a child, he seemed unshakable to me, like a rock. And suddenly, it turned out that beneath this outer firmness, there was a crack no one knew about. My brother and I were sitting in the kitchen one night after our parents were already asleep. He said, "I can't listen to his advice anymore. How can he teach me to be a man when he betrayed my mother like that?" I didn't know what to say. At that moment, I was asking myself the same question. My father taught me honesty, told me that family is the most important thing, that respect for women is the foundation of everything. And then I held letters in my hands that completely contradicted his words. But oddly enough, it was this very situation that made me think about the kind of man I wanted to be. I realized that ideals don't exist. Even the strongest and most reliable people can make mistakes, betray you, and destroy what they spent years building. And then you have a choice. Repeat their mistakes or do everything you can to make your life different. I became more mindful of my relationships. When I met the girl who would later become my wife, I told her right away, if something ever comes up between us that's hard to talk about, let's agree. We'll talk anyway. I don't want to repeat my parents' story. And it worked. We fought, argued, sometimes yelled at each other, but we never hid the truth, even if it was painful. And every time I thought of that box of letters as a symbol of how hidden secrets destroy families more than any conflict. I've never been able to recapture the closeness I once had with my father. I respect him. I see that he's trying to improve for my mother's sake, but the wall of mistrust remains. Sometimes we'll sit together in the garage, tinkering with the old engine, and he'll start telling stories from his youth, as if he wants to bring back the feeling of how things used to be. I listen and smile, but deep down I know I'll never be able to see him the same way again. The most terrifying thing about the secret I accidentally revealed isn't that it changed my family. It's that it changed me. It robbed me of my unconditional faith in my father. And perhaps that's what growing up is. Understanding that your parents are people too, with their weaknesses and mistakes. But with that comes a burden, the need to build your life so as not to repeat their path. Sometimes when I think about the future, I imagine my son finding my old notes or messages, and I get scared. Not for him, but for myself. Because I've realized a parent's legacy isn't just their love and care. It's also their mistakes, which you carry within yourself and learn to overcome. My mother has always been a role model for me. She could endure anything, protracted renovations, illnesses, my brother and I's stubbornness, financial difficulties. She carried the house on her shoulders and always found the strength to smile. When I found those letters, I thought for a long time, does she know? Maybe she guesses, but is pretending nothing is happening. Or would it be as much of a shock for her as it was for me? I began to watch her. She seemed oblivious. She still cared for us, cooked, asked how we were, defended my father from petty reproaches. But sometimes I caught her gaze, tired, dull, as if for a second she had slipped out of reality. In those moments I felt she knew, or at least guessed, and it was her reaction that taught me something very important. She never allowed herself to be humiliated. Even if she suspected he was cheating, she didn't make a scene, didn't yell, didn't break furniture. She continued to live, work, and care for us. She was strong, but not cold. Her strength lay not in suppressing her emotions, but in preventing them from completely destroying the family. I realized that respect for a woman isn't just about pretty words and gifts. It's about not betraying her trust, because I've seen how hard it is to live with a man who smiles at you at dinner while he's hiding other people's letters. And when I started building relationships myself, I made a promise to myself. I would never make the woman I love feel the same emptiness my mother felt. I learned to tell the truth, even if it was unpleasant. I learned to listen, even when I was tired. I learned not to run from problems, but to solve them. Mom may never have known the whole truth, or maybe she simply chose silence for the sake of her family. But her silence spoke louder to me than any words. It was like a warning. If you one day start lying, you will destroy everything, even if you think you're doing it for your loved ones. So, as trite as it may sound, it was my mother who shaped me into the kind of man who values honesty and trust above all else. I realized that a woman who's by your side needs to feel safe, not only physically, but also emotionally. And if you betray her trust, no amount of force or apology will restore her confidence in you. The day I showed him the letters, his face changed. First shock, then instant indifference, as if he'd blocked out his emotions. He simply shrugged and said, "So what? It's his life. Let him do what he wants." I remember how those words made me shudder. I was seething inside, but he sat there calmly, as if we weren't discussing infidelity, but someone's old journal. It wasn't a catastrophe for him, like it was for me. He chose the side of indifference. When I asked, "What about Mom?" "She doesn't know anything. Do you understand how much this will kill her?" He simply replied, "Then let her not know." Do you want to ruin her life? Do you want to deprive her of her husband, her home, her familiar way of life? Are you ready to take that on yourself? He spoke harshly, even coldly. I realized he was looking at everything practically, without unnecessary emotion. In his eyes, my father remained a man who provided for the family, helped out, fixed the faucet, and took the car to the mechanic. It was as if he had divided him into two personalities, a father to us and a man to someone else. But it was killing me. I couldn't accept it. Every time I saw my mother putting the plates away, taking care of us, I thought, if only she knew how many years he'd been living a double life. My brother, on the other hand, believed silence was the best solution. "We're not children anymore," he once said. "Let them have their own adult secrets." The main thing is that he didn't abandon the family. Do you think Mom doesn't understand that? Do you think she's that naive? His words stuck in my head. Maybe Mom really did guess, but turned a blind eye for the sake of her family. Maybe my brother was right, but every time I was alone, the feeling of betrayal washed over me again. I couldn't take it as calmly as he did. For me, trust was the foundation of everything, and my father had destroyed that trust.